everyone, and welcome to this week's meeting with Sanal Edamaruku speaking. I'm Shubhi Sinha, heading the youth wing of Rationalist International. As you all know, that we have linked our Zoom, YouTube, and Clubhouse together, so I welcome you all. Now you can ask questions through any of these platforms, and we are happy to welcome all of you who have been participating in our meetings for so many years. So now coming to the topic, roots of Indian rationalism. Rationalism is a very big movement in India now. The figures last year stated that almost 30% of the population are non-believers in India as compared to 10 years back, which was around 7%. But what is the root of Indian rationalism? The general inference is that it is inspired by Western thought, but we all know that the earlier form of rationalism was in ancient Greek and ancient India. But what is the concept of that? Did we have a long nature of non-believers before, or what exactly was it 2000 years back about rationalism? For all these thoughts, I would like to call Mr. Sanal Edamaruku to present his take on this and give us an insight. So welcome, sir.
Shubhi, thank you. And for all of you now coming to the topic. Well, we all know that rationalism is a topic which is very, very well discussed in India, and it's very, very much in the public domain and public discussion at this moment. But what is rationalism for many people is not what is understood by some other people. For many people, rationalism is just denial of a supernatural world, denial of the existence of the belief, existence of a God, which many people would believe. And beyond that, some other people would also see that the rationalists are opposing all traditional rituals and unwanted, pressings of the baggage of the past. But we all know that the rationalist movement is much beyond that. The common notion about rationalism, as we all know, comes from the times of Descartes, and which speaks about reasoning as the basic of understanding. But modern rationalism has gone much beyond that. Modern science has developed later, and we now know that the source of our whole information should be based on three fundamental principles. We seek evidence for any kind of belief. Any belief, any hypothesis, any opinion, any understanding, any senses of people that they feel are all fine, but that would ask for evidence. So rationalism or rationalist method seek evidence. That's the primary level. Reasoning or questioning was the key of rationalism during Descartes' time. But modern rationalism, with the development of the science movement, starting perhaps from the beginning of the last century, heretism or denial of the traditional faith and the glorification of modern science has started still earlier in the mid of 18th centuries or early 18th century, we can see that. But the modern rationalist movement took a little more advanced position than just seeking evidence. One major position that the rationalist movement has developed, or the scientific communication or science as generally has taken, was it's not just evidence that decides everything, but also our understanding about evidence should be based on a test of falsification. That's another major development we all have. We are making the base of our understanding, the base of our knowledge, the base of our verification methods more and more systematic and more scientific. Therefore, from seeking evidence, the earlier stage of modern rationalism, we have grown further to seeking a clearance by falsification. falsification is a well-known phenomenon, which we all know in the medical science or in any scientific innovation. We use the method of falsification. For example, we get into one inherence, one idea. We think that it's correct because everything proves, all evidences prove that it could be correct. That's not enough. There can be still a mistake. We have to allow falsification, all different kinds of questions, negating that, all different possibilities. What were the alternative possibilities that could have given the same result? And that all are to be excluded. And the question and challenges of all falsification should be addressed to. Then only one would get into a clear understanding of things. So as we all know, the fundamental laws of physics that we know are limited to something like 100 basic laws. Understanding these basics of the laws of physics was one major step of our knowledge about the universe. We know certain fundamental laws of the whole way things are functioning. We know the law of gravitation, for example. Similarly, many other basic laws we understood, we studied, and our horizons expanded. We may find new laws. Then our understanding will further grow. But there is another new level the rationalists have contributed to the philosophy of science. Beyond evidence, beyond falsification, we need one more step. That comes from the human nature of fabrication or the tendency to create fraudulent results and fraudulent evidences. Therefore, the rationalist movement in its growth has developed one more major step in the process. It should be not only evidences that you see, it should not be just overcoming the falsification, but it should be proved or verified that it's fraud-proof. I'll tell what it means by one small example. Some years back in India, there was a person in Tamil Nadu who came out with an idea that he was in a position to produce petrol and diesel by using some special plant that he is in control of. Only he knows it. And he can produce it. He just boiled this particular set of, it's a kind of herb. He would boil it, and from that emerges petrol or diesel. It's against the principles of petroleum that we know. One understands that there is no carbon content in the whole thing, but it's a fuel that works. And he has shown that this works. The first checking, the first evidence, was this actually functioning as a fuel in any of the vehicles? Yes. One has seen that this is put in automobiles and it works. And it was tested. It had elements of petroleum. So it was all correct. So then falsification process started. What other methods probably could be there? Did we understand something wrongly? So it surveyed almost all the tests in front of experts and scientists. He has been showing his new discovery of boiling some herbs and creating petrol. The state of Tamil Nadu supported his movement because it's a wonder. It's a new innovation which would be changing the whole economy of the world if one develops this technology. What was this herb? He would not tell people. But at the end of the day, it was an investigation of the rationalist in Tamil Nadu that explained how he was doing it. He has tested it. He has shown it. The whole method in front of a set of scientists. Some 25 or 27 people have. The Tamil Nadu government has entrusted a set of scientists to study it closely, see the method and see the results and apply the methods of falsification, and well, it went through everything. And he was granted a huge funds by the state of Tamil Nadu to further develop that his name was Ramar. It was known as the Ramar Patrol. It was a very well-known story. But what happened to him, what happened to the Ramar Patrol is not much discussed now. That shows one important tool that we require in the process of understanding things or getting into conclusions. Not only evidences, not only the ability to survive the test of falsification, but also ability to survive a test of possible fraudulent methods applied. It was a very simple thing that he was doing. When he was boiling all this fuel, all these herbs, he was stirring the whole thing with a wooden, big spoon. And he kept on changing it. 2 or 3 people would keep on stirring it, a thick wooden spoon. A team of rationalists who joined the whole process later with their normal, skeptical mind, critical mind. They wanted to inspect the instrument. They wanted to inspect the vessel. They wanted to inspect for example, the spoon that he was using, the thick wooden spoon he was using. So they started doing something which the scientists did not do, because they concentrated on the result only. They concentrated on the evidence presented to them only. The possibility of a fraudulent practice behind the whole thing was not verified. Now they found that the spoon was a special one, a wooden spoon, where the inside was an empty cavity, which was full of fuel already filled in. And there was a small hole at the top, which he would be holding, and a small hole, a set of small holes at the bottom, which was not very much seen. So he would hold the top hole, and the fuel, the real fuel inside, would remain there. But at the appropriate time, he would release the finger, and the actual fuel would be released to this water or this boiling liquid. So this will float up as fuel. And that was collected. In fact, he was giving a wrong example to people. He was actually adding in petroleum, real petroleum, which perhaps he bought from some petrol station, and was adding to this mixture and claiming that it was real petrol that was coming out of his new experiment. Well, of course, this got earlier with serious attention because there are efforts going on to create bio diesel. It's not diesel exactly, but fuel which can be used in cars, which can be used in automobiles based on bioproducts. That's another effort going on. So because of this background, this got an immediate currency. So this is something the rationalist movement has contributed all around the world, especially the skeptic part of the rationalist movement contributed to the philosophy of science in the 21st century. So this is one good example. We have a lot of examples everywhere. If you remember, when the Ganesh statues were drinking milk, we got a lot of explanations. But the simple fact that there were fraudulent practices also, part of that was brought out by the rationalists. Everywhere, whenever such claims are coming, with the falsified or false claims or pseudo-scientific claims, that was explained with a critical mind, seeing behind the scene or verifying that there was no fraudulent methods used. Sometimes, if you remember, there have been very, active scientists who wanted to get fame would produce fossils, artificially produced so-called fossils, fossil in quotation, and making claim that this was a part of their own innovation. Many times such claims have been exposed. So which means one would need a mind critically to examine whether fraudulent methods were used in the process of examining things. So evidence is not the only thing. Falsification is not the only second thing, but also that it's done in a fraud-proof or fraud-protected situation is also an important thing. So that is one way of seeing things. The method of science or scientific attitude is further growing and expanding, and our understanding and our ways to understand things are further growing. But did we have roots of similar thought earlier? I'm speaking about the roots of Indian rationalism today. There are many roots for rationalism in different parts of the world. We all know that one of the major places where we all think the rationalist ideas, ancient rationalist ideas began was the critical questions raised by Socrates. So the three major people of those times, Socrates and his disciple Plato and his disciple Aristotle, and how they have developed not only the idea of reasoning and questioning, but also evaluating the social structures based on the questioning method and deriving into their own conclusions, which has influenced the whole global order for a long time. From there, one could see an ancient way of thinking, critical thinking developing. But let's discuss about that later. We have a lot of literature available about the ancient Greek or Western roots of scientific attitude or rational thought or critical inquiry. But what are the sources of critical inquiry in India? You can see these days a new school is presented, which we never heard earlier, which is known as Hindu atheism. Hindu atheism in quotation, I would use, because we have never heard this terminology earlier. In the recent times, this terminology is getting slowly currency. A set of people are emerging with an idea that ancient India had critical thinking or atheism or rationalism, and that is the Hindu rationalism or Hindu atheism. Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, one of the major publications in the publishing houses in the field of scholarly books on the Hindu side, something like some decades back, they have published a book, The Hindu Rationalism. And what they try to do is something coming from the past in ancient history, which they consider part of a period. And they try to claim the whole period's thought into one philosophical school and try to call that all Hindu. The word Hinduism or Hindu was not existing, for example, during the Vedic times or Upanishad times or even the pre-Vedic times. The terminology developed later. The present day, when the idea of Hindu religion emerged and stabilized, it has a tradition. It has a root that they claimed. That is the Vedic tradition. That is the Brahminic tradition. The Brahminic religion or the Vedic religion has become the foundation of modern Hindu thought. But there are another set of people who want to show that that's not the only source. There have been people who criticize Vedas, who challenge Vedas, and who doubted the divine origins of Vedas, challenged it. There have been so many sources available, and these kind of sources were collected by a lot of people and spoken about by a lot of people, starting from Devi Prasad Chattopadhyaya, one major scholar. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has been speaking about this. Another great scholar, namely D.D. Kosambi. They all have been studying about of course, there were a lot of studies earlier. Rahul Samkrityayan is another major name we have to remember about the scholastic studies about this period. But the whole idea is a bit confusing for a lot of people. How come an old tradition of non-belief or criticism of Vedas or criticism of the traditional faith is still considered part of the main past of India? Was it a very influential past? Well, let's go into that. There are two schools that generally are classified as the ancient Indian rationalism. One school is known as the Lokayata school. That is the terminology that is, developed by Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, an Indian scholar whose works are published all around the world. He called the whole critical movement of the ancient times in India, where all should be classified as Lokayata movement. So he has written a book, namely Lokayata. He has written another book, namely Ancient Indian Atheism. And also he has written a book about ancient Indian philosophies. Another major scholar who became India's president, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, he has written a book about Indian philosophy, 2 volumes. It's available. It's even translated into different languages. It's available in German, I have seen. In French, it's available. In many Indian languages, this book is available. So he tries to explain the Indian philosophical history systematically, almost very systematically, but he tries to get into an idea that it was systematically growing forward from worshipping nature, then worshipping animals, then worshipping trees, then worshipping a kind of a unclear universal spirit, then moving into personal deities, and personal deities are transformed into bigger gods and bigger political systems connected to that, and finally evolving into something which is different than these personal deities or multiple gods, but towards a universal mind or universal faith. So he tries to see the whole thing the way he thought was a positive thing. And he finds that the ancient worship of nature, which every society had, has been coming from there. And there have been critical inquiry at the earlier part also. Then eventually it has moved from a personal deity, personal god, to a non-entity of a god, but a universal spirit, which is not interfering into our day-to-day life. And that has been the evolution. And that was a positive evolution of Indian philosophy, is what he tries to generally evaluate. That's a very wishful thinking. Dr. Radhakrishnan is a very positive philosopher. He wants to conclude the growth of Indian philosophical thought into something which is very, very positive. But has it been like that, or was there a period where things were still better in thinking and it got bad later? There are many points which we have to see in history. For example, what is the word used for atheism in ancient India? Atheism in modern meaning, it means the denial of a god. The whole Semitic tradition, there is a belief in a personal god. One god who created everything, who preserves everything, who takes in control of everything when things finally end. So this one god has different names given by different traditions. The Judaic tradition gave Jehovah as the name, and Christians followed the same thing, Jehovah. They made an intermediary god, namely Jesus Christ, who is the son of the Holy Spirit. But the Jehovah spoken in the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament, is slowly vanishing, and you see the predominance of the Son of God, who is also part of the main God, but it's a transformation, but it comes from the same tradition. But it all gives the idea of one single God. You can see the same thing in Islam also. One single God, Allah, and the final messenger, Muhammad. So this idea is clearly a Semitic idea. If you see the Indian tradition, you don't see this kind of a single God anywhere. Any ancient literature that you take the Vedas. the Samhitas, the basic texts of Vedas, the Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda. You don't see a personal single God in the Vedic tradition at all. The personal single God is a Western idea. In fact, it's a Semitic idea which was taken by the Western world, and from there that came to different parts of the world. One of the first major philosophical intrusion into Indian thought probably was during the time of Emperor Alexander, who tried to invade India. That has a huge cultural influence upon India. Alexander, also one has to remember his personal background. I told you about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, three stalwarts. And Aristotle was the personal teacher of Alexander. Alexander's father, the king, wanted his son to be educated very well in the Hellenic thought, which he considered the world's most philosophy and the great center of all cultures. And he equipped his son, he built up his son to spread the Hellenic values all around the world. Interestingly, most of the ancient wars were to capture wealth, to defeat and make and expand an empire. Alexander's invasion, if you see, closely watch, he was trying to defeat different areas, sometimes changing the political leadership, influencing the whole structure, but establishing institutions to spread his ideas about the universe. During Alexander's time, you have to also remember that there was no person, there was a universal God for the Greeks. But like, for example, in India, you have so many gods, and there is a world where gods are living. And you see, for example, Zeus and Jupiter become the supreme gods, but in a world of several gods. Like in India those times, India had so many different gods, or they didn't even call gods, devas they called. And the king of devas was Indra. That is how they thought. That's nothing to do with the present day idea, the popular idea about a belief in a god. Indra was the god, was a king of a set of people who were higher beings, the devas, who were permanently troubled by another set of people, the opponents, the asuras. And they were in permanent conflict. And in the conflict, the other set of people on earth who wanted to be part of the devas tried to win the support of the devas and do a lot of hymns and prayers and sacrifices to satisfy these devas, not a god. Deva is something like, there is no, correct English word for that. One amongst many gods, one can say. It's a world of gods. So Indra was to be satisfied. He would be satisfied with many things. He would be satisfied with sacrifices. And he would be the sacrifices were made, animals were sacrificed, and they were killed in a special way. And they had fantastic ideas. They thought that a special kind of fat will emerge from the body of the animal which is sacrificed by suffocating it with pressing all the holes, nose and mouth and ear and everything is closed. And then they thought a special kind of vapa, a kind of soft fat would emerge near the neck, and that was to be burned for the gods. The gods liked it. That's how they believed. So they had animal sacrifices. And that was explained in all the ancient texts in Rigveda. It's so well explained. And all the rituals were all connected with satisfying the king of gods. They wanted very successful children, win the wars against their opponents. They wanted security, they want good weather. For everything, they did sacrifice, and they tried to win these people. That was a time when animals were so brutally sacrificed and systematically. That is where one sees a set of people emerge who criticize this process. That is what the kind of people who were known later as Charvakas. The Charvaka is, some people try to personify about one Charvaka, but there is no evidence that there was one Charvaka. But the story of Charvakas criticizing the system that was running comes through different centuries in different stories. And we see a lot of mentioning about Charvakas. The Charvakas would, speak about the certain things that the traditional faith at that time or their inferences were simply denounced. For example, one of the major questions which is mentioned about Charvakas is it's a statement. One does not know whether Charvakas actually said it because there are no original literature of Charvakas available at this moment. We have a lot of critical literature about Charvakas. There are several parts in Upanishads speaking about Charvakas, quoting them and trying to answer them. In Mahabharata, one sees Charvakas coming. The epic is written much later, much later after the Vedic period, but see, the Charvakas are coming in the story. If you remember, after the war, when Duryodhana was defeated, Duryodhana was the king of the other side, which the god did not favor. Krishna was on the side of Kauravas. It's two set of cousins who fought for a kingdom, simplified like that. And there are a lot of stories, a lot of values and conflicts and everything is articulated to the whole thing. But at the end of the day, set of two cousins for a kingdom, two claims, and they fight, and one is accused bad by one set of people, the other is accused bad by the other set of people. And one set of people, when they win, the Pandavas, when they win, with the support of an incarnation of God, becoming a charioteer of the major warrior, and they win the war. That's how the story goes. But at the end of it, the story tells about a Charvaka emerging and telling that the whole war was meaningless and the justice is actually denied. The country actually belonged to Duryodhana. Because the law of the land at that time was the ruler's son should be in rule. And he was the son of the ruler. So that was the argument. And also the justice of the war and the illicit ways used in winning the war were all criticized by Charvakas, as mentioned in many versions of Mahabharata. So the Charvakas were countered. They tried to answer it. Then Charvakas were burned down. That's the story. So you see the story of Charvakas coming there. But also you can see mentioning about Charvakas in the Jain literature, which came much later. They speak about Charvakas as Charvakas were a kind of unethical people, is what they try to say. Why it is unethical for them? Because the Charvakas said very clearly that there is no life after the death. The fundamental belief of I come to another set of religions, another set of religions which has rationalist tradition, which is known as the Shramonika religions. The three religions mainly, the Buddhist religion, the Jainist religion, and another religion which is non-existing now, which is known as the Ajivaka religion. These three religions are classified as Shramonika religions, which has a different tradition than the Vedic tradition. Certainly, both these are totally different from the Semitic tradition. These are the Oriental religions. The traditions can be certainly classified into two for the past. One is the Vedic tradition. The second is the Shramonika tradition. The Shramonika tradition partially denounces, one part of it partially denounces the Charvakas, thinking that their position is totally against the views of the Jainist views. So, for example, one set of the kind of ideas codified or classified those times were known as Shastras and Sutras. Shastra is, that's the term, word that is still modern times used for science, but it has nothing to do with modern science. Shastra means a set of knowledge only. And whatever they thought a set of knowledge, they called it Shastra. And eventually, later kingdoms and empires used the terminology of Shastra for so many different things. For example, they believed, many of them in the later part, not at this part, later part believed in the influence of lizards in our day-to-day life, and their movements and their sounds and everything can influence our life. They called it Gauli Shastra, the set of knowledge of the lizard. Texts are available. Also, there is a text available about Vimana Shastra. The Vimana is, that's a terminology. Again, these words are very confusing because that's a word used in many Indian languages as a parallel to aeroplanes. But Vimana is a flying machine of the past in the legends. They speak about the Vimana. In many legends, such flying machines are coming. Especially in Ramayana, you can see a Vimana, which was originally not made by gods, but by Kubera, and it comes into the control of Ravana, the opponent of Lord Ram, as per the story. And he steals Ram's wife, Sita, by using this flying machine. But this, what was the kind of fuel they had to fly? Of course, that was to be carried by birds. They cannot imagine about fuel, but but how they fly it? The Hindu scholars or the Vedic scholars or later Vedic scholars thought about probably a science behind the whole thing, and probably they had medicine. They had a technology behind it. So you can see a later literature, apparently in the 7th century or 8th century, which is known as Vimana Shastra, the science or set of knowledge about the flying machine. It speaks about burning or boiling mercury, thereby creating an energy which can elevate a flying instrument, which can go forward and backward. But it codified, it has written so clearly how it is done, what's the method and how exactly it is done, what's the quantity of material to be used and what's the whole process. It's all explained. Also, it's important that whatever they thought as knowledge, there was an idea that these all were to be recorded. The set of knowledge were to be recorded, and they tried to do that. That's an important stage. But whatever they recorded, we could all verify now. The Indian Institute of Technology at 2 different levels, at 2 different times, tried to replicate this set of knowledge, or Shastra as they call it, and try to replicate creation of a Vimana made by the ancient method. They recreated it. No, but it would not fly. It would not create energy to elevate it. So it was tried in 18th century, it was tried in 19th century, it was tried. And later, IIT students tried at 2 different places. And it's just an idea which did not work. But why these kind of things were written there? It was very simple that the belief at that time, which was a very correct one, that all set of knowledge should be recorded properly. They recorded everything. For example, many people believe that the lines on our hands would decide the future of the people or the destiny of the people. The belief in destiny was very important in Indian tradition, which another part of the ancient Indian rationalists challenged. So they believed in destiny. They tried to find destiny, the secrets of destiny in every part of our body. For example, how your face looks like, what kind of, is it oval shape or round shape, that has an influence. Your eyes will have an influence, but especially the lines of your palm. So they call it Hastarekha Shastra. Shastra means set of knowledge, means the lines of your palm, the set of knowledge based on the lines of your hands. Still, many people follow that. They think that it's a science or set of knowledge. But it has been, it is very, very clear that these kind of information were not up to the modern understanding of anything. But this was a set of knowledge many people thought correct. But when the governments were producing all this literature, all this collection of knowledge, a lot of people apparently appearing, having the custody of a lot of ancient wisdom and knowledge, and they tried to produce sometimes fake, many things. Sometimes they believed what they thought correct, and they wrote it down, and that were all considered to be Shastra. That is one set of knowledge of our past. So these set of knowledge, which was not verifiable, which could not be successfully seen by other people working, were challenged by a lot of people. All these, Shastras were challenged. They said it does not work, but the political system encouraged the assimilation of what they thought set of knowledge, and they continued it. There was no verification. There was no critical inquiry upon that. These people, they repeatedly questioned, challenged, and tried to seek evidence, and they wanted to experiment it, and they wanted to methodologically study it, but which was not allowed, and which has apparently brought a lot of wrath. So they were not in the good books of the system at that time, but they have been a big influence, which you can see in the later part of the Upanishads. In Upanishads itself, you can see mentioning about all these traditions. In many Upanishads, in discussions, that I said quotations about the Charvakas or Lokayatas were coming. Another example. One major criticism comes about the Charvakas, that they were unethical people. And what was the reason for that? They quote a position taken by the Charvakas. They said, if you don't have butter, then you need butter for your body. Your body is the most important thing for you. Therefore, for nourishing your body, you should get butter. If you don't have butter, borrow butter. If you cannot borrow butter, even steal butter, but have butter, because you have to nourish your body. If you survive, then only you can think. No one knows whether Charvakas wrote exactly as these people said. But that is at least the narrative presented about Charvakas by its critics. But the idea, if one sees the whole thing, is trying to present an idea that a life is based on our health. And those times it was considered that you eat still a lot of people believe, eat the purified butter, ghee, and that's the source of health. Nourishment, that was considered to be the major source of health. So those times, if somebody says that have good food and have good health, and then only your brain works, then only you can survive. If you perish, it doesn't make anything. Survive first and then fight. Then the next stage comes later. So if that was the philosophy, some people call it's purely materialistic, because it has no values, but pure material survival of the individual. That's one criticism that comes. But no one knows whether this was the way that the Charvakas have actually written or not, because the original literature is nowhere available. We see mentionings in epics, we see mentionings in Upanishads, we see mentionings in earlier texts of other religions, but we don't get anything very clearly. But also, if you go back before Charvakas, Brihaspati's literature in Vedas, you can see the same kind of critical mindset coming. I would suggest that even in Vedas, though the Charvakas were Nastikas, as they were called, Nastika is not a word similar to atheism. That's the word used for atheism in India. But the original meaning of Nastika is very simple. One who is not Astika, who is opposed to Astika, is a Nastika. And what is Astika? Astika is the belief in a spiritual world. Belief in because there was no God at that time, a life after this life. That idea comes after the Vedic period. You come to see that this idea that life does not end here. Something continues after our life. That idea comes so predominant after the Vedic period. again, I mean, I'll just briefly come to another interesting point at this stage. Where did it come from? In Vedas, in the original text of Vedas, I mean, if you take the first three Vedas, you don't see Atharva Veda is not considered to be the first the major Vedas, because that speaks about a lot of black magic and rituals, and it's a kind of ancient shamanism that is there in Atharva Veda. But if you take the ritualistic Vedas, I mean, which are Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, and Sama Veda, you see, even in Atharva Veda, you don't see it, but in the three major Vedas, especially in Rig Veda, there is no mentioning. Maybe one can take some kind of sentences somewhere and try to explain that it speaks about, but there is no mentioning about the idea of rebirth. That's very interesting, because the idea of rebirth was not a Vedic idea. But you see this idea developing in India later, very predominantly. And from where this idea come? Did it exist anywhere in the world? Can there be a connection between that? You see the earliest mentioning or thought about the idea of rebirth or reincarnation of people dying and getting a new life. This idea comes first in the known literature is from Aristotle. Aristotle tries to explain misery. He could not get any logical backing for the idea that goodness he believes in. But if goodness does not bring success or goodness back to you, what shall be the explanation? So he tries to explain it, telling that there could probably another life earlier. You have done something wrong there. The then belief is that if you do good, you get good back. Do bad, you get bad things back. The karma, as many people would say. But the idea of the karma, which the common folk language that it comes, that you do bad things and you get in your life bad things, is what the general folk belief in many other traditions also, in Greek tradition also. Here, Aristotle tried to interpret in a very different way. He said, apparently there was another life earlier, and from there you have done something and you are getting it back to you in this life. If logically that's correct, if you do good things here, then you have another life, and there you would get the benefit. Aristotle said it. He wrote it. But who was Aristotle? I told you earlier, Aristotle was the personal teacher and trainee of Emperor Alexander. He was brought up under Aristotle. He was a personal teacher. The Hellenic principles were coming from the Greek tradition, the biggest empire of those times. And Alexander comes to different places to spread the fundamentals of the Hellenic ideas. Do we have any mentioning? I've asked it many times to scholars in many television debates in northern India. When I was speaking to scholars of Veda also, I've been raising this issue. I'm very curious about this. I'm almost sure that the pre-Alexander mentionings of any kind of rebirth by even a little casual mentioning in some little part somewhere is not substantiated with the present day belief of reincarnation that has developed in India later. And that's exactly on the tunes of Alexander's belief. But I mean, a lot of beliefs in the past had no reason, but maybe their thoughts at that time, their own imagination or their hypothesis without any evidence or verification. But there was a method already developing, critical approach, critical inquiry, asking questions. The traditional faith can be questioned if you think something else could be correct. This method has started. In Vedas, you see this such a thing. One of the chapters of Rig Veda, that's what I said before Charvakas, you can see critical inquiry in Rig Veda. One of the chapters of Rig Veda starts with a question, which Jawaharlal Nehru quotes in his discovery of India. The exact sentences could be different. It means as follows: what shall be the origin of this universe? What could be it? There can be many ideas that can try to explain it. But whatever ideas would come, there's another question. If before the emergence or creation, Srishti is the word used, before the creation, what was there before that? And who created the creator? If there was a creator, who created the creator? And who created, for example, the nature could be a creator, and who created the creator, and who earlier created the creator's creator? And if he goes further, where is the answer? That's a puzzling question. Even now, one would always ask anybody who is a drastic theist. Who created? Everybody speaks about a creator, but who created the creator is a question that we ask. And that question you can see in the beginning of one chapter in Rigveda, which Jawaharlal Nehru quotes. So Rigveda is not, a set of knowledge given by some gods or anything as these people believe. There is no doubt about that, but it's not also coming from one source. It's spread in a big span of time, coming from different sources, different thoughts, different hymns, different prayers, different attitudes, different views, and these all are collected together as a community and preserved, like any other communities would do. There was another thing you can see on the same period, Saint Avesta in Persia. Those times, any kind of prayers or methods of living or ritualistic patterns that people developed, they collected it. They tried to remember it because there was no writing at that time. The method that people developed at that time was to recite it and remember it properly. Saint Avesta was preserved like that. And Old Testament was preserved like that. All ancient texts. You can see it in all ancient texts. They all continued by people who believed that was some great knowledge, tried to take it by heart and communicate to the next generation, and it was carried forward. Most of the old literature, everywhere in the world, not only in India, everywhere in the world, that was the way. But Rigveda raises questions, sometimes insists on things, absurdities. You can see a lot of absurdities in Rigveda or in many other Vedas, of course. I don't go to Atharva Veda. That's not a part of our discussion today because there is not much critical inquiry coming in Atharva Veda. But in Rigveda, you can see elements of critical inquiry. So that goes further. So you see Charvakas, another set of people, Kapila, Kanada, Samkhya. You can see many sets of people coming up. So ancient Indian philosophy is classified into two categories: the Gnostic philosophies and the Astic philosophies, the theistic philosophies and the non-theistic philosophies. But if you take Samkhya, for example, Samkhya is classified into an atheistic philosophy, but it denounces the idea of any traditional knowledge, it denounces any creator. It speaks about the natural laws more specifically. So the classification itself could be absolutely wrong. And for example, Dr. Radhakrishnan has many, one major scholar who was Indian president, as I told you, was very clearly mentioning that this division of ancient Indian philosophy of theistic and non-theistic is absolutely baseless, because most of these theistic philosophies, you can see elements of modern day atheism and total denial of many things, and insisting on logic as the foundation of understanding things. The idea of logic you can see in scattered different parts of the Vedic literature, in many parts of Upanishads, but this idea of assimilation of knowledge and collecting knowledge and storing it, rightly or wrongly, when we see things at this time, many things are so absurd, like the Hastarekha Shastra, like the Gauli Shastra, the lizard science or science, not science, we cannot call it science, though the word is Shastra, set of knowledge. These all are absurd. Or the way how, for example, rain is coming. It's in Vedas, it's explained that the animal is sacrificed, the smoke is going up, and the god is very happy. The first part of Veda, Rig Veda, you see Varuna as the major god, the god of rain. And he would be priest and he would be delivering the rain. That was the ancient belief. But that was a set of law that they believed, the universal law, as per their understanding of those times. And they tried to make a logical foundation for it and tried to do a certain ritual to achieve it, which looks absurd now. Even most of the Hindu traditional scholars would denounce the rituals, which are, there are, for example, if you look at Shiva Purana, a later literature, you can see an interesting story. That story is as follows. Shiva and Parvati. Shiva is one god, later a predominant god. Shiva and Parvati were, as usual, traveling on the skies. And down there, they see a Vedic, or what you call a Vedic sacrifice going on. And what do? They try to win the gods by killing an animal, by closing all the holes of the animal. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears, and the rectum, and the genitals. They close all the holes. And then they suffocate the animal and kill it. And they try to get a special thing that they believe, vapa, from the animal, a kind of accumulated thin fat. Whether such a thing exists or not, even not very clear. That is what gods were happy. And Shiva and Parvati discusses. And then they discuss, as per the legend in the Shiva Purana, what a stupid thing they are doing, how cruel their people are, and what do they do to make people, make gods that we are happy. Then they ridicule and make joke about it and pass over. That's one story. So there was, in the same faith, you can see criticism and ridiculing and denouncing of different other faiths. It's all in a frame. These all coexisted. So many people thought whatever is the set of knowledge, they try to accumulate it, they try to disseminate it, they try to make rituals accordingly, like in any other society, but they try to alter it, change it, modify it. I come to the other idea about reincarnation, which I've been explaining. So you can see the idea of reincarnation coming in the Upanishad period. But certainly after Alexander's invasion, he had ambassadors left here. He had his people here in the teaching process, and the Hellenic culture was introduced to the Indian system. Was that the influence of the idea of rebirth, or this is originally here? Now coming to the other tradition. Now I've been speaking briefly about this one tradition, the Charvakas, or broadly the Lokayatas, or Kapila, Kanada, Samkhya, all this tradition that is generally known as the heretic school of Indian thought, spanning from something like 1000 BCE, something like 3000 years back from now. They had all these critical ideas against what the majority of the people believed, and that still had an influence in the thought process. And you see another set of belief emerging. Apparently, the Charvakas were defeated, or the Charvakas were not successful, but you see another set of people emerging. The Shramonika religion, which is known as I told you, the Buddhist tradition, the Jaina tradition, and the Ajivaka tradition. Many people do not know about Ajivaka tradition because they don't exist anymore. Therefore, I'll explain first briefly what is Ajivakas. All the three Shramonika religions refused to accept the idea of a personal God. It was a predominant faith system in India which controlled the whole country, and many emperors took this faith seriously and spread all around the country. Those times, if you know, if an emperor changed the religion, the whole country changes the religion. And Ashoka, for example, as for all evidences that we have, he has changed the religion and he has taken Buddhism as the major part of his faith. And the whole idea that was attributed to Buddha, let me see attributed to, because we do not exactly know whether exactly in this form it was said in the original text, ahimsa, non-violence as an idea, coming from the influence of the Charvakas very clearly, because that's what Charvakas said earlier. One of the major quotations from Charvakas, which is denounced by the then Vedic religion, was as follows. The Charvakas raise a very, very serious question. There were a lot of criticism about killing animals for sacrifice, about their life and their misery. So the answer was very simple. They were answered, all the animals who were killed in the sacrifice would go, their life would go along with the smoke that goes up to the Devas. This goes up to the Devaloka, the world of the gods. Anything that is sacrificed, that sacrificial animal would go. I mean, it's not heaven. You cannot say the word use heaven. Heaven is a Semitic idea. There is no heaven in Indian tradition. In fact, it's the world of the gods. It goes there. So the Charvakas counter it. Their question was very simple. Kulkarni, who tried to codify, Kulkarni is a Maharashtrian scholar who tried to codify all the quotations of Charvaka from critics. And then he tried to write it down. And he published a book earlier. I mean, I have a right of that book, and in some languages we have published it again. We will be publishing that book. These are with original quotations against Charvakas, the quotes made by its critics. And he tries to write it down properly. And I mean, that's how he tried to give a picture of what Charvakas have been speaking. One question was very simple. If all the sacrificial animals killed in a heaven, if they go to the world of the gods for sure, and if you believe what you say is correct, I have one logical question. The question is very simple. You love your parents, your father and mother very much. Don't you want them to go to the world of the gods? Why don't you sacrifice them then? It's a very serious question. If this was correct, if somebody sacrifices an animal or anything, that will make that life go to the world of the gods, which is a very high position, high thing that one can imagine, the highest possible position that one can imagine. Why don't we sacrifice all our beloved people, our father and mother, and get them go to the other world? That was the kind of question that was quoted about the Charvakas, which was taken, how cruel these people are. They are speaking like that. And that was answered. So there are many, many, many things that are attributed to Charvakas, but this question, you can see, has haunted these people. It had haunted these people over centuries. And you see the Buddhist tradition coming out with a fundamental question, no sacrifice of animals. Ahimsa is not killing animal, not just killing any animal. Buddha or Siddhartha or Gautama himself ate meat. Emperor Ashoka reduced the number of the deers and the peacocks killed in the royal palace very, very heavily, but he still ate meat. But killing animals for meaningless, sacrifices, that was what mainly the Buddhist tradition was challenging. Those times we have other literature available. For anything, the Brahmanism was in race, and they had their own laws to glorify the position of the Brahmins. The authority was very clearly established by a lot of set of books and values, not books one can say, a lot of literature that they produced. And anybody the biggest sin is killing or denouncing a Brahmin. And anything that if you have insulted a Brahmin, if you have made his life uncomfortable, he can be given, you can do a lot of sacrifices, you can donate a lot of cows to them, and you can do a lot of sacrifices. And even in Vedas, when the animals were sacrificed, when there was very clear narration about what part of the body should be given to what priest of what gotra, Purohita of what gotra. For example, Uddhav should get the shoulder muscles of the killed animal, and which gotra should get the meat from the legs, which one should get the meat from which part of the body of the animal, ribs. I mean, everything is discussed in Rigveda. Many people do not read this book. Translations are available, but though it's not available to common people, or people don't bother. But this was the ancient belief, and that is what the Shramonika tradition thoroughly questioned. And their value system, because a set of values is what we can call a faith. Any religion is a set of values. It's not a set of belief only. Because there is no God for Shramonikas, there is no God for Buddhas or Buddhists. Also, there is no, though most of the modern day Jainis follow different kind of Hindu gods, originally in their faith, they don't have any gods. They believe in life that continues. And they believe in karma. They believe in nirvana. I mean, most of the Shramonika tradition religions are following a kind of attainment of a fulfillment through this process of life and the set of values that you have to maintain for it. A new set of values come and replace or predominantly influence over the old tradition. And you see their influence for a long time. Again, ancient Indian rationalism was one major school, one set of people where the Charvakas, the Kapilas, the Samkhyas, or the Lokayatas in general. Other set of people were the Shramonikas, next phase, where Ajivakas believed in destiny, absurd belief. They thought that we cannot influence anything. Everything is destiny. So you don't have to do anything. You cannot influence anything. Everything work as per the destiny only. The common faith in India is that everything is written on your forehead. You cannot change it. That's the one popular belief even now. That's coming from the Shramonika faith. They believed in destiny. They were not creative. They were not producing anything. They thought, I mean, if you get food, that is because you are destiny only. Destiny decides everything. It's a very classical thought in many parts of the world. But this belief in destiny, which went into the extreme, made practically them extinct. But the Jainas and the Buddhists survived. But you cannot see, I mean, Jain community you can see as a faith system. It remained in India as a small thing, but in many parts it became more ritualistic. It had set a new set of faith, which is more ritualistic, not based on any kind of supernatural belief, but you can see elements of ancient rationalism in the Jain faith. Elements of rationalism you can see in Buddhist faith also. But that's not modern rationalism. But you can see these major schools, the Charvaka school and the Shramonika school. And that existed something like, 3,000 years at least from now in the past. And that was the first known major influence on a society with the rationalist ideas. You can see Greek tradition for a period, but you cannot see the predominant influence on a whole culture, the critical inquiry or rationalism coming as a continued process, mainly because the Greek tradition, Greek empires collapsed and the Roman Empire emerged. And in 4th century, Roman Empire was, transferring its basic faith from the Roman gods to Christian gods. You know that in the 4th century, the Roman emperor turned into Christianity and its tradition has changed differently. But in India, the critical inquiry scattered in different schools from the Vedic period to the Charvakas and through the Shramonika school. It went as a very parallel, powerful school. You can see elements of the critical inquiry or rational thought in Vedanta to an extent. For many Hindus, though most of the Hindus are very ritualistic, for many Hindus there is no God. Nowadays, most of the scholars in the Hindu school, would argue that when you say that you are an atheist, they would say that that's part of the Hindu faith. I've heard the same answer from many people. For example, when I was a journalist in New Delhi for a long time, I had a meeting with the then Home Minister Lal Krishna Advani, who is the leader of a Hindu nationalist party. And clearly they are for a Hindu nation. And he was trying to, when my father and we both were journalists and we went to meet him, I mean, of course, with any other political leaders we would be meeting. And he tried to, I mean, knowing our background, he said, you are part of Hinduism because you are atheist. Well, we laughed at it, but we explained also that the Charvakas perhaps were terminated by the mainstream faith. Now you glorify them, but that was not how it was earlier. Well, I mean, that's the way of many people's presentation. I also remember that some months back, I had a debate with a Hindu scholar about Bhagavad Gita, about the real message of Bhagavad Gita. There was a discussion. So it was a very friendly, but a very articulate, a very powerful discussion. And the Hindu scholar on the other side, he tried to explain that atheism is also respected as a school of thought, and the great Hindu scholars were all atheists. That's what he tried to explain there. This is a new way of presentation. Interestingly, you can see a new chapter in Wikipedia, which is, I mean, it's a very new one. It speaks about Hindu atheism. In fact, the denial of the theistic school existed pretty long back before even Hinduism emerged. During the Vedic time, you can see it. We don't have any evidence about Mohenjo-daro Harappa period, but Vedic period, we can see very clear evidence about such thoughts emerging in the ancient form of it. You can see it in Upanishad period. You can see it later. The counter movement against that in the Oriental tradition, the Shramonika movement, denounces the traditional faith. Again, you can see the influence of critical inquiry and rational thought there. But what happened to that? We don't see this continuation later. For example, Buddhism has gone to different parts of the world. It has gone to the East Asia, it has gone to China, it has gone to Japan, it has gone to different parts of the world. They speak about the tradition of Buddha, denouncing the traditional faith and rituals. And still, many of them, I've heard from friends in Japan. I worked in Japan for 1 year. I heard from them claiming that, well, we have an atheist tradition. Recently, I met somebody from Thailand who also spoke that I'm from a Buddhist background. As you know, Buddha was as an atheist. I mean, I don't know whether all Buddhists would agree that, but Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the person behind the fundamental concept of Indian Constitution, who fought for the rights of the deprived people in India, though he personally did not believe in a God, he converted to Buddhism at a later part, along with 1 million people, thinking that that would be a big replication of the past by denouncing the Hindu faith to go into a faith that is not with these social deprivations existing, where there is no caste system. Unfortunately, that also did not work because the converted Hindus from the Dalit background or the untouchable background are considered untouchables even now after the conversion also. Conversion is not a solution, which is not a topic at this stage, which we will discuss later, but the tradition of India from the very beginning is embedded with rationalism, critical thinking, and inquiry. Where we lost it? How did we restart it? That shall be the discussion point next time, because this is a lecture series of 3 different parts. First part, we are discussing now the ancient Indian rationalism. Second part, the decline of the rationalist movement in India in the medieval period. And third part, the modern rationalist movement that starts in the 18th century. These are the 3 lectures in this series. So we end now. Thank you very much.